Minnesota Golden Gophers are 2 weeks away from kicking off the 2025 season against the Bulls of Buffalo at Huntington Bank Stadium on August 28th. So, as preseason fall camp winds down, it's a great time to look at where their depth chart sits. Tuesday's practice was the last time the media and fans will get a look at the team before their season opener. So, it's a great time to break everything down and try and predict what their depth chart could look like. PJ Fleck notoriously does not release depth charts, unlike some teams like Wisconsin and Iowa. So I'm going to do my best to predict where things stand heading into that week one game against Buffalo. So, right off the bat, the quarterback position, obviously the most important position on the field. Drake Lindsey essentially earned the starting spot in the spring, beating out Zach Pyron, the Georgia Tech transfer. But Pyron is no longer here, so Lindsey has worked clearly as the one all summer heading into the season. Undoubtedly, still the team's starting quarterback, no surprise there. But behind that, Emmett Moorhead, the team's backup, transfer from Old Dominion. I think he has earned that backup role this season. He's the only quarterback on the roster with starting experience. Shigen Jansky and Dylan Whitkey got plenty of run this season or I guess this summer at the reserve position. But I find it hard to believe if Lindsey were to go down with injury, they wouldn't deploy Moorhead as the backup quarterback, as the team's next option. That starting experience is just too much to ignore. And when Whitkey and Shigen Jansky are two guys that have not started a game at the college level, and then rounding out there, Jackson Collick, the four-star true freshman. Definitely, I guess, looks like a true freshman, and I think he's pretty clearly the fifth guy on the depth chart right now. But no reason to panic there. I think the quarterback position's pretty clearly Lindsey, Moorhead, Chiganjansky, Whitkey, and then Collick heading into week one. So, heading to running back. Another position that I guess had a clear outlook heading into the fall, and I don't think there really have been too many surprises. We saw Vanderbilt transfer Johan Cardenas surprisingly enter the transfer portal or leave the team this summer. There's no confirmation of why or any reason behind that decision, but it's no longer with the team, so the Gophers now have seven scholarship running backs. Darius Taylor clearly number one. I think Marshall transfer AJ Turner is still number two. Going to kind of assume that Marcus Major role left behind from last season. And then you have Cameron Davis, the Washington transfer, who I think he kind of gives me a little bit of Bryce Williams vibes. A guy who, if Taylor goes down, I could see Davis almost being the number one option, and then Turner almost sticking to that number two option. That it just Davis is like he has a very high floor. He's not going to fumble. He's not going to make dumb decisions. He's a veteran. He knows what he's doing. Does not have the same high potential as Turner or even Fame Ejioboy, but still a very talented player. And as I mentioned, Ejioboy, one of the top performers from camp, in my opinion. Just a redshirt freshman, but I think he has a really bright future with the Gophers. And I think he's a guy that they could try and get maybe like 2 or 3 carries a game. And maybe he plays a little bit like in the return game. He's just an explosive running back that gives them plenty to look forward to if Taylor and Davis are gone after the season. I think a Turner and Ejioboy backfield next year with maybe a few portal additions is plenty to be excited about. So, as looking at the rest of the offense now, let's go to the offensive line. I think 4 spots are pretty set in stone right now. And the number ones, I guess, have been this for all of camp that I have seen. Greg Johnson at left guard, who played center last year, now moving back to guard where he played as a true freshman. Ashton Beers at center, moving from guard to center. UCF transfer Marcellus Marshall firmly at that right guard spot. And then Kentucky transfer Dylan Ray, I think, has earned the right tackle starting position. And then at left tackle, the only one that's up in the air, Khalid Tafai, Washington transfer, and redshirt freshman Nathan Roy. I've been battling for that position all summer. Tafai was out most of the spring with an injury, but he has worked his way back into firmly being a potential starter at left tackle. I think it's a battle that's going to carry well into week one in the regular season. Uh, I would firmly say it's 50-50 right now. Roy dealt with some minor injuries during fall camp here, but I think it's something Brian Callahan has shown, the Gophers offensive line coach, that he's more than willing to have a positional battle at the offensive line heading into the regular season, and he likes to rotate there from time to time. And I think that's going to happen at left tackle. I'd give Tafai the slight edge, to be honest, but I could totally see Roy earning that spot by the end of the season. But that's definitely one to monitor. I think Tony Nelson's pretty clearly their swing offensive lineman, for lack of a better term. If any of those interior guys would go down, I think Nelson would slip in there. Um, if Beers went down, I think Johnson might move back to center and then Nelson to guard. And then Purdue transfer Jaden Ball and Breck Harrell if there were another injury, but I think they would kind of shuffle things around and get Nelson in there if there were an injury in the interior at any of those spots. But other than that, I think it's pretty clearly a top seven up front. And if anyone else plays out of that seven, I think it would be a bit of a surprise and there'd be a lot of injuries. At tight end, another clear position, I think Jameson Gears, number one. One of the more underrated tight ends in the country and one of the more underrated players on the Gophers roster. I think he could pretty clearly be a real contributor and a 400 to 500 receiving yards guy for Drake Lindsay. I think it's really interesting. Everyone likes to talk about the receivers, about Coy Parrish, about Darius Taylor. But I mean, it wouldn't shock me if we look back after the Buffalo game and Jameson Gears leads the team in targets. Would not be a stunning development, in my opinion. So it'll be interesting to see what his production is this year. But I think he has a potential to surprise some people. And then after that, Purdue transfer Drew Biber is clearly, I think, the number two receiving option there. And then Frank Bierman, a guy who played last year kind of as a predominant blocking tight end, has kind of played a little bit as a fullback this summer. I think that he's going to almost play that Kyle Juszczyk role. He's number 44 now. Just a really good blocker, really athletic guy. He's not a traditional tight end. I think he'll line up at tight end a little bit, but I think the Gophers are going to kind of move him around as a blocker, and he'll definitely play. But I think Gears and Biber are those traditional tight ends that will play more. And then if there's another guy who works his way in, I think it'll be Pierce Walsh, who has a bright future at the position. But obviously, not many teams go four tight ends deep. And then to the receiver position, talked about a ton this summer. Javon Tracy, Miami, Ohio transfer, I still think this team's number one option. Um, but honestly, I think Lemecki Brockington's closer than people realize. I think he's had a great fall camp. And it wouldn't shock me if there's a few games this year where he leads the team in receiving yards. I think he's going to have a surprisingly big year. He's kind of the overlooked guy because he's been here for a while. He's dealt with injuries. People kind of forget about him. But I think he could have a big year this year. He was in Bruce Feldman's Freaks list. And I think this could be a big year for him in a Gophers uniform. And then Logan Loya, UCLA transfer, I think is pretty firmly the starting slot. And then behind that is when it gets interesting because Jalen Smith, redshirt freshman wide receiver, has been one of the top performers at camp. And I think he's earned the wide receiver four role. When the Gophers go in four wide receiver sets, I think he's going to be the guy who's out there. He's just too good to be left off the field. I think he's developed too much of a rapport with Drake Lindsay. I don't think he's going to start week one, but I think his role's only going to continue to grow throughout the year. He continues to improve every week he's out there. And will he have 35 catches? No. But I think he's going to make some huge plays this year. And I think he's going to be a true breakout star on this team. So that'll be interesting to watch. And then after that, it even gets more interesting because Coy Parrish has played wide receiver in camp. Is he the wide receiver four? Is he a starter? Like, there's still so many questions there of what his role is going to look like offensively. But if I had to slot him in a depth chart perspective, I think wide receiver 5 is a reasonable place. But then again, I think at all these positions, especially at receiver, I think the Gophers could rotate very early in the year. I think it's very fluid. They're going to want to get Parrish on the field and see what it looks like. So, um, he could come in, replace Logan Loya. Maybe he goes in the slot, replace Javon Tracy. Maybe he runs some X wide receiver routes. He's going to play. So, considering him wide receiver 5 almost seems incorrect, but putting him any higher also would seem incorrect. So, it's a really interesting situation at wide receiver, and I think it's almost going to be a committee approach early in the year, and it's really fluid. I can't confidently say that this guy's wide receiver 1, this guy's wide receiver 2, this guy's wide receiver 3. I don't think it's that type of situation. So, it's really interesting because you even throw in guys like Kendrick Lanier, who's probably a backup outside wide receiver, but there's only so many targets to go around. Malachi Coleman, I think, is just too big of a target to not play in the red zone. I can't see him getting many first and second down reps midfield, but when you get into those special packages and formations in the red zone, he's just too talented to not play in those spots. I think he will play this year, but I would temper my expectations. And then lastly, Christian Driver, a guy who played in the slot last year, kind of in that backup role, probably projects in the same spot, but he didn't play. He didn't practice 2 weeks ago on Tuesday. He didn't practice this last Tuesday, and he wasn't even on the field. So that's an interesting situation to monitor. I don't have any information on that situation. I haven't heard anything. But if he is healthy and if he's on the team, I think he's just a clear backup to Loya at that slot role. But I think those, I guess, what is that? 4, 5, 6, 7. Those 8 receivers would be the guys I expect to see plays. Nuke Hayes got in last year during the bowl game, but it just there's only so many spots. They're deep at that position. They might not have the top end talent like that in 2019 with Bateman and Tyler Johnson, but they sure are deep. So that's the offense. I guess moving to the defensive side of the ball here, the D line. One of the more interesting position groups on this team because you have Devin Eastern and Jalen Logan Redding in the middle, two proven Big Ten commodities that are going to be solid players this year. But they might be asked to do a lot and play a lot, which is a tough thing for any interior player, especially in a conference like the Big Ten. Purdue transfer Mo Amanode has not practiced this summer with a back injury. And to think that a reserve defensive tackle injury can impact the defense might be a little strong, but I think it will impact this defense a little bit. Stony Brook transfer Rashawn Lawrence is more than capable of a backup interior guy. But behind that, you have Nate Becker, who's played less than 100 snaps in his college career, former walk on. Theo Randall has been out of camp as well with a lower leg injury. He's been rolling around on a scooter. So that leaves Riley Sunrum, former 4-star defensive tackle, 4-star high school recruit. He's played a lot this camp, and I think he could sneak into a couple plays this year if Omanode is out for all the most of the year, and maybe Theo Randall again, because Sunram then would be competing with Nate Becker, who is a former walk-on, for that fourth defensive tackle role. Most teams go 4 deep at that position. You just don't want to put too many snaps on your top guys because if you have an injury to one of those top guys, then you're oof. If there's a position right now where they can't, I think, afford another injury, I think it's defensive tackle. At the top, they're more than solid, but it's really thin right now. So that's an interesting thing worth monitoring. But at the edge, you obviously have Anthony Smith, a guy that maybe if there was an injury to the interior, maybe Smith bumps inside, plays a little more interior. And then you lean on Jackson Howard, Lucas Finnessy, and Steven Curtis, who are still bit of a question marks. I think Howard has earned the second starting spot at defensive end. But Curtis and Finney will play a lot. I think that's a solid position group they have there. Probably a little deeper than the interior, probably a better ceiling than the interior, but there's still some questions there. So, um, a few injuries have kind of made a shallow position even more shallower, but I think they're still solid heading into 2025. Then at the linebacker position, we have Maverick Baranowski, a guy that I guess the team will probably need to take a big step forward with Cody Lindenberg off to the NFL. I think Devin Williams is probably his running mate to start the season. But behind that, this is one of the, I guess, surprise deep positions in the summer here. Emmanuel Carmo, incoming true freshman, number one player in the state, 4-star recruit, had a boatload of offers. He's looking the part so far. I think his role is only going to grow throughout the year. I think it could be something from a pure snap count perspective that we saw with Coy Parrish last year. Parrish did not play much in that North Carolina game, but he got a pick against Rhode Island in week 2, and then it was kind of off to the races from there. I could see a similar thing with Carmo. Maybe they start with a rotation of Baranowski, Williams, Roberson, week 1 against Buffalo. Maybe Carmo gets in 5-10 snaps, plays a little special teams, and then next week against Northwestern State, maybe halftime, Gophers are up 25-30-0. And then Carmo comes in, makes a few big plays, and they're like, man, we got to get this guy on the field. And then maybe he usurps Roberson as the 3. And then in his spots, you're like, wow, we got to get this guy on the field. Because that's kind of what Parrish did last year. Because he was kind of the third safety behind Kerry Brown and Aiden Gooseberry early in the year. And then he just became too good. And they were like, we can't have this guy on the sidelines. And I could see a similar thing happening with Carmo. I don't want to compare them in terms of top end potential, but from a pure, I guess, snap count perspective, that's, I guess, kind of where I see things. And then Joey Gerlach's another guy that, if there were an injury, he's more than capable to fill in there and add some depth to the position. And then Matt Kingsbury is an interesting guy here too, because I think he's more than capable to play significant snaps, but he's kind of been working as like a third linebacker, outside linebacker, defensive end, a little bit of interior. He's kind of like a hybrid player that I think could help out in special formations and play, I guess, at a couple positions. So he will factor in here. I don't know exactly where, but I would be shocked if he doesn't play at least a little bit this year. So he's another guy worth mentioning. And then speaking, I guess, about those hybrid positions, let's get into the cornerback room, where Zaquan Bryan is probably the only sure thing right now as a starter. Returning redshirt sophomore, played a lot last year. Ethan Robinson, Justin Wally out the door, so the Gophers need to replace a lot. And my best guess to start alongside him right now is Iowa transfer John Nestor. But Jalen Bowden from NC Central and Mike Gerald, redshirt freshmen, are definitely still have the potential to earn that spot. And I might even throw in Naeem Parrish, true freshman, in the mix. Um, it's a lot like wide receiver. I think a lot of things could happen at this position, and they could go in a lot of different directions. I think it could change week to week. I think they could be like, this guy is struggling, we'll move to this guy. They have a lot of options they can go. None of these guys are out of eligibility after this year either. Kind of like the receiver position. I believe Loya and Brockington are the only guys that are done after this year. But Rylan Kelly also in the mix, redshirt sophomore. They legitimately have 6 players that could play at outside cornerback. It's not the same high end consistency they'll have last year, but they have a lot of options they can look at. So that'll be an interesting thing. If I had to guess right now and handicap it, I would say Brian, Nestor, Gerald, and then Bowden. But then again, it's like the wide receiver thing. I can't confidently say this guy's the starter, this guy's the backup, this guy's cornerback 3. It can change a lot, and I would temper my expectations and say it would be pretty fluid there. Didn't even mention the slot cornerback position. Darius Green, I think, is a guy who's going to start there. He was out of practice on Tuesday, but it was pretty minor injury. Giante McMillan, former TCU transfer, has missed a good chunk of practice with a lower leg injury. I think his is a little more serious. If I had to guess when healthy, I think Green will play. I think McMillan will play. I think it'll be a rotation thing, but I would give the edge to Green. And then if both those guys are out, they can lean on Aiden Gooseby at the safety position, who gives them another hybrid player they can move around. The safety position, we all know Kerry Brown and Coy Parrish, one of the best duos in the country. And the safety position, oddly enough, is the only position on the Gophers roster that did not add an incoming freshman or an incoming transfer. Because Brown and Parrish are so good and among the best in the country, they didn't need to add anything there. And Aiden Gooseby is probably one of the best third safeties in the country. So there's no question marks there. There's no question marks about who's playing, and really good position. Rounding out here, special teams unit. I think Brady Denenberg, the Syracuse transfer, has earned that starting kicker spot. Wouldn't shock me if we saw little Daniel Jackson, but he's a true freshman, so he can learn behind Denenberg this year, and you can kind of let him loose next year. And then at the punter position, I think it's a two-man race between Richter from UCLA and Tom Weston from Ouachita Baptist. I think that's something we could see two guys punt throughout the year. I think they're pretty neck and neck still, but it'll be a lot of options for special teams coach Bob Ligashevsky. So that's what we got for the roster. There's a lot of young players. The more and more I look at this, the more and more I talk about it, that have a lot of potential to contribute this year, and why I've said multiple times about the 2-year window. If you want to be an optimistic Gophers fan and say they're going to sneak in and be this year's Indiana, I think next year's their time to do that. I think you uh, take the lumps with a redshirt freshman quarterback this year with Drake Lindsay. You have him coming back. You have Coy Parrish coming back. You have Javon Tracy coming back. You have Jalen Smith coming back. And on the defensive side of the ball, you have Jackson Howard. You have maybe Riley Sunrum. He breaks out. Nathan Roy on the offensive line. Greg Johnson comes back his senior year. You can have plenty of guys coming back next year. So, should be a fun year. I appreciate you guys for listening. Make sure to check out our other Gophers written content over on Gophers on SI, other Minnesota sports written content with Twins, Vikings, and Timberwolves on SI. Make sure you leave a like on the video, hit subscribe, leave a comment. Helps us a ton, helps us get found. As always, I appreciate you guys for listening. And until